Welcome to my channel, The World of Science Fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.
He swore an oath to save lives. He didn't know that her life would become his death. The planet Viridia was a graveyard. Combat medic Caden crawled over the wreckage of a shattered transport, ignoring the protesting groan of metal beneath his weight. Twisted alloy, once a proud vessel, now nothing but jagged teeth biting into a blood-red sky. For 8 hours, he had been the only living human within a 100-kilometer radius. His squad, 12 soldiers, 12 friends, had perished in an ambush that came without warning, leaving him alone under the merciless glare of twin suns that cast overlapping shadows across a landscape of nightmares. The acrid stench of burning fuel and flesh lingered in the air, coating his lungs with each labored breath. His body ached from injuries he hadn't had time to treat. A gash across his forehead, a dislocated shoulder he'd forced back into its socket with a muffled scream, 3 cracked ribs that protested each movement. But Caden kept moving, driven by a desperate need for redemption. He dragged himself toward the last functioning communicator, where Rico, his best friend since academy days, had been stationed. The device crackled with static. Then a weak voice filtered through. "Kai, I can't." Then silence. Just like that, Rico was gone. "No! No, no!" Caden pounded the communicator with a bloodied fist. "Not you too. I should have been there." He grabbed Rico's dog tags, the metal still warm. The engraving caught the harsh sunlight. "Keep them alive until they can save themselves." It had been their motto through medical training. He had failed. As a medic, as a friend. The Hippocratic Oath was a luxury he couldn't afford. Not here. Not now. Not on a planet where even the stones seemed to wish him dead, where the very air tasted of malice. But it was seared into his soul as deeply as the scars on his hands. Hands that had saved hundreds, yet failed to save the 12 who mattered most today. Failed to save Rico. And when his scanner picked up a faint, intermittent life signal, he cursed himself and followed it. He knew better. He knew that in a war zone, survival meant prioritizing your own life. But that wasn't who he was. That wasn't the oath he'd taken. And he wouldn't fail again. "This one," he whispered to himself, clutching Rico's dog tags. "This one I save." "Damn it all," he muttered, adjusting the crude bandage on his forehead as he triangulated the signal's location. "Just once, I'd like my conscience to take a day off." The signal led him through a field of wreckage, not human design, but the elegant, almost organic curves of alien craft. Their iridescent blue hulls, now charred and broken, reflected the crimson sky in pools of dark liquid that Caden recognized as blood, but not human blood. It was thicker, darker, with an opalescent sheen that caught the light in hypnotic patterns. In the center of a scorched clearing, amidst debris and the bodies of her own race's warriors, he found her. A blue-skinned warrior woman, whose beauty was as stark and deadly as Viridia itself. Her armor, what remained of it, clung to her form like liquid obsidian, shimmering with embedded technology he couldn't begin to comprehend. Her face, framed by what resembled metallic dreadlocks, was a study in controlled agony. High cheekbones, a proud nose, and lips pressed into a thin line to suppress screams. Around her neck hung a crystal amulet, catching the harsh sunlight in a way that momentarily reminded him of Rico's dog tags. The connection was irrational, but in his grief-stricken state, it felt like a sign. She was pinned to the ground by a spear, but this was no ordinary spear. It looked alive. Dull crimson flashes pulsed along its coral-like surface, and the wound around it wasn't bleeding, but seemed to throb with a dark, sickening energy. The spear shaft vibrated subtly, as if it were breathing. She was conscious. Her amber eyes, filled with unbearable agony, focused on him. Those eyes were like nothing he'd seen before. Vertical pupils within irises that shifted color like oil on water. "Leave, human," she rasped in broken universal, her voice like gravel over silk. "My penance is not for your eyes." Caden ignored her. His medical scanner beeped frantically as it tried to analyze her physiology. Unknown species, unknown wound type, unknown prognosis. All he knew was that she was suffering, and that was enough. He set down his pack and removed his gloves. He saw a wound. He was a medic. Nothing else mattered. I'm going to help you, he said simply, his voice steady despite his racing heart. Try to stay still. He knelt, his hands closing around the spear shaft. It was warm, vibrating, as if it were a living thing. No, more than that. It felt almost sentient, resisting his touch with a subtle pressure that made his skin crawl. Don't touch it! Her scream was filled with desperation, her body arching upward despite the agony it must have caused. You don't understand! But Caden had made his decision. In his mind, this was just another extraction, another foreign body to remove. His training took over. He positioned himself for maximum leverage, gripped the spear firmly with both hands, and took a deep breath. On 3, he said, though more to himself than to her. 1, 2. He pulled. The resistance was immense, as if the spear had anchored itself to the planet's core. Caden's muscles screamed in protest, his cracked ribs sending lightning bolts of pain through his chest. With a monstrous effort that tore at flesh and spirit alike, he ripped the spear from her body. For a moment, the world stood still. The spear in his hand seemed to pulse with anger, with hunger. The warrior woman's eyes widened in disbelief, and then everything changed. The wound on her body healed before his eyes, the ravaged flesh knitting together with impossible speed, leaving only smooth blue skin where death had been poised to enter. The agony in her eyes was replaced by shock, then horror. She struggled to sit up, touching the place where her mortal wound had just been, her fingers trembling, and Caden screamed. He looked down. On his own body, where his body armor had been torn by shrapnel, a perfect replica of her wound bloomed. There was a sound, not of tearing flesh, but something wetter, more organic, like meat separating from bone of its own volition. The smell hit him next. Ozone, like an electrical short circuit, mingled with something alien and sickly sweet that made his stomach turn. The wound pulsed and writhed as if alive. The same ragged gash, the same dark pulsation, and the pain. Oh gods, a pain so intense the world dissolved into white flame. It was as if every nerve in his body had been dipped in acid, as if his very soul was being torn apart, cell by cell. The spear fell from his nerveless fingers. He collapsed onto the crimson soil of Viridia, his vision tunneling. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was the warrior woman's face, not looking at him, but at her own unblemished skin, touching it with disbelief before her eyes met his, horror dawning as she realized what had happened. The last thing he heard was her frightened whisper, "What have you done?" Consciousness returned to Caden in waves of agony. Each breath was a fresh hell, each heartbeat sending pulses of torment through his body. He was lying on something relatively soft, animal skins perhaps, in a dim space that smelled of earth and strange herbs. "You're awake. Good." The voice was hers, but different now, clear, precise, with an accent that curved around the universal language like water around stone. Caden tried to sit up, but the movement sent such a blast of pain through him that he fell back with a gasp. His hand moved instinctively to his chest, where he felt not a wound, but some kind of poultice covering it. The substance was cool against his burning skin, but did nothing to diminish the pain. "Don't move," she said, moving into his field of vision. "The cathar will only feed more intensely if you struggle." She looked different now. She had cleaned herself, adorned her metallic dreadlocks with small crystalline beads that caught the light from a strange, bioluminescent lamp hanging from the rock ceiling. They were in a cave, he realized, a natural formation that had been minimally adapted for shelter. Caden reached for his medical scanner, his training taking over despite the pain. He passed it over the wound, the device emitting a low-pitched whine before displaying, "Error, biological anomaly, tissue unstable." "What is this thing?" he asked, his voice raw. He pulled a suture kit from his medpack, but when he tried to thread the needle through the edges of the wound, the filament passed through the flesh as if it were smoke, the edges immediately separating again. "Damn it," he snarled in frustration, throwing the needle aside. All his training, all his technology, and he couldn't even close a simple wound. He was helpless, useless. "Your instruments are worthless against this," she said, watching his futile attempts with a mixture of sympathy and grim satisfaction. "Now you understand?" She approached and pushed his hands away from the wound. "This is not an injury. It is hunger." She knelt beside him, mixing what looked like phosphorescent moss with the saliva of some small creature she'd apparently caught. This won't heal it. Nothing will. But it will calm it. Slow it. As she applied the mixture, Caden felt a slight numbing effect. Not enough to eliminate the pain, but enough to make it marginally bearable. "My name is Lyra," she said, sitting back on her heels. "I was the commander of the elite Void Phantoms, the finest warriors of my generation, and I had been sentenced." Her voice trembled with a mixture of horror and guilt. She wasn't looking at him, but at the wound on his chest, her wound. "It is the Cathar," she explained, her slender blue fingers hovering just above the pulsing darkness on his flesh, never quite touching it. "The Pain Eater. It is not a weapon. It is a symbiotic sentence. It is placed upon traitors and oathbreakers." She told him the truth, each word cutting deeper than any blade could. The Cathar did not kill its host. It sustained them, feeding on the endless agony of the unhealing wound. It was an eternal torture, a living death. The ultimate punishment in a culture that valued honor above all else. Except she realized with growing horror, as she studied his pallid face, that wasn't entirely true. Not for him. "Your body," she said, her voice dropping. "It's rejecting the symbiont." She placed her palm against his forehead, feeling the unnatural heat there. "The Cathar is designed for my kind. Our physiology can sustain it for decades. But a human body—" She shook her head, her metallic dreadlocks catching the dim light. "It's consuming you too quickly." "How long?" Caden asked, his voice steady despite the implications. Lyra's amber eyes met his. "Days, perhaps a week. The symbiont feeds on life force released through pain. Your body cannot replenish it fast enough." Caden absorbed this information with the clinical detachment of a medic receiving his own diagnosis. "Then we don't have much time." "For what?" "To find Vorlag," he said simply. "He designed this punishment, didn't he? He must know how to reverse it." Lyra's expression darkened. "Vorlag did not design the Cathar. He merely perfected its use." She turned away, her voice becoming distant. "He was my mentor once, the greatest warrior of his generation. He taught me everything I know about combat, about honor." Her fist clenched. "About sacrifice. And then he betrayed you?" "He believes he saved our people from me," she said bitterly. "From my weakness, my compassion. In his mind, mercy is a liability our race cannot afford. The mission I refused, the one that led to my sentencing, would have sacrificed an entire civilian settlement to eliminate a strategic threat." She met his gaze again. "I could not do it. And for that, he deemed me unfit to lead." "So this isn't just about clearing your name," Caden said, understanding dawning. "It's about two visions for your people's future." "Yes," she whispered. "And now your life hangs in the balance of that conflict." She extended her hand to him. "We must move quickly if we are to save you." The Deadlands lived up to their name. A vast expanse of cracked obsidian plains, dotted with twisted spires of rock that seemed to claw at the sky like the fingers of buried giants. Nothing grew here, nothing lived here, except for them. Lyra led the way, her movements precise and economical, like a predator conserving energy. Caden followed, one painful step after another. Each day the Cathar seemed to burrow deeper into his flesh, sending tendrils of agony throughout his body. But each day he forced himself to walk a little farther, to stand a little straighter. They became two ghosts, hunted by an entire world. During the day they hid in crevices and caves, avoiding the scorching heat of the dual suns. At night they moved, guided by the eerie glow of Viridia's three moons, one crimson, one amber, one pale blue, casting multicolored shadows that danced across the barren landscape. Lyra, with her knowledge of the planet, found them water in hidden crevices and food in the form of hardy desert larvae that tasted like bitter almonds. She taught him to navigate by the moon's positions and to recognize the tracks of predators that even the Deadlands couldn't keep at bay. Six-legged reptilian creatures with translucent skin that revealed their internal organs, pulsing hypnotically as they hunted. "These are the tracks of a shade crawler," she explained, pointing to faint impressions in the dust. "See how the middle claw's deeper? It's carrying extra weight, probably eggs. We avoid this area. Females are territorial." As if summoned by her words, a low hissing sound emerged from behind a nearby rock formation. Caden froze, his hand instinctively moving to the makeshift weapon at his belt. "Don't move," Lyra whispered, her body tensing. "It's hunting by energy signatures. The Cathar, it emits a specific frequency when you're in pain." Caden understood immediately. The constant agony he'd been fighting was acting as a beacon, drawing predators to them. As if to confirm this, a particularly sharp wave of pain lanced through his chest, causing him to stifle a groan. The hissing intensified, and the creature, a shade crawler nearly 2 meters long, slithered into view, its translucent body glowing faintly in the moonlight. It moved directly toward Caden, its sensory appendages quivering as it locked onto the energy signature of his wound. Lyra's eyes widened in realization. Without hesitation, she drew her blade and sliced her own palm. Blood the color of midnight welled up, and she let out a small gasp of pain. The creature paused, its head swiveling between them, confused by the competing signals. Lyra moved away from Caden, holding her bleeding hand aloft, creating a second target. The crawler hesitated, then changed direction, following the new, more accessible energy source. When it was far enough away, Lyra doubled back, rejoining Caden behind a rocky outcropping. "The wound," she explained quietly, binding her cut hand. "It leaves an echo in the one who bore it. I can still feel it, like a phantom limb. When I feel pain, it creates a similar energy signature, but weaker." Caden looked at her with new understanding. "You used yourself as bait," she shrugged, "a small pain to prevent a greater one. The Cathar has made us connected in ways neither of us fully understands yet." And he taught her what compassion was. Every evening, fighting through the pain, he would tend to the wound on his chest. He used the remnants of his med pack, cleaning and dressing the wound himself, though it never improved, never healed. And every time he touched it, Lyra would flinch, her face contorting with phantom pain. "I remember this," she whispered one night as he applied an antiseptic salve. They had found temporary shelter in a cave whose walls were covered in phosphorescent moss, bathing everything in a soft, greenish light that made Lyra's blue skin appear almost turquoise. Every touch, it was like this for me, for 3 years. In this temporary shelter, a cave whose walls were covered in phosphorescent moss, they spoke truly for the first time. He told her of his service, of his fallen squad, of his oath. "I joined the medical corps because I couldn't stand seeing people suffer," he admitted, his voice low. "Ironic, isn't it? Now all I do is suffer." "Why did you pull out the spear?" she asked, her amber eyes reflecting the bioluminescent glow. "You must have known something was wrong." Caden shrugged, then winced as the movement sent fresh pain through his chest. "I saw someone in pain. I acted. That's all." She told him of General Vorlog, her rival, who had orchestrated her fall to take her place, of the warriors she had led who now believed her a traitor, of a military operation gone wrong, hundreds dead, evidence planted to implicate her. "He was always jealous," she said, her voice distant with memory. "I was born to a lower caste, yet rose to command the Void Phantoms. He could not bear it. But to sacrifice so many warriors just to destroy me?" Her fist struck the cave wall, sending a cascade of glowing moss spores into the air. "He will not stop until he has destroyed everyone who knows the truth." "Then we have to get to him first," Caden replied, though he didn't believe his own words. How could a dying man challenge a powerful general? Yet something in him refused to give up. Perhaps it was the oath that still bound him, or perhaps it was the growing bond with this alien warrior woman who carried the burden of his pain in her memory. "You would help me?" she asked, genuine surprise in her voice. "After what my sentence has done to you?" Caden met her gaze. "What else do I have to lose?" As days turned to weeks, their bond deepened. Caden's condition deteriorated, the Cathar feeding on him more voraciously as his strength waned. Yet Lyra's presence became a different kind of sustenance. She began to share stories of her world, of her people's complex honor codes and the beauty of their crystal cities. She showed him how to move silently, how to read the desert, how to survive. Every one of his groans was an echo of her past. Every one of her touches was an attempt to atone for the future she feared he would not have. One night, as they huddled against the biting cold of the desert darkness, Lyra's hand found his. Her skin was cooler than human temperature, smooth but with faint ridges like fingerprints across her entire palm. The touch was electric, unexpected. I dreamed of revenge for 3 years, she confessed. It was all that kept me alive through the pain. And now that I am free of it, I find myself dreaming of something else. What? Caden asked, his voice hoarse from the day's silent suffering. Justice, she said simply. Not just for me. For you. She squeezed his hand. I will find a way to remove the Cathar. I swear it by the 3 moons. The pursuit caught up with them in the Talon Canyon. A massive gash in the planet's surface, with walls of obsidian that reflected the moonlight like polished mirrors. They had been careless, leaving too clear a trail in their search for water. The guardians of balance, warriors in ritualistic armor that seemed to shift colors with their movements, had tracked them down. Their faces were hidden behind masks that resembled the skull of some ancient predator, with glowing eyes that pierced the darkness. Stay behind me, Lyra ordered, pushing Caden into a crevice as she drew a blade she had fashioned from the wreckage of a crashed ship. Whatever happens, do not reveal yourself. Caden wanted to protest, but the Cathar chose that moment to send a particularly vicious wave of pain through his body, leaving him gasping and clutching at the rock for support. Lyra faced her former comrades, 5 of them, armed with weapons similar to the one that had condemned her. They spoke in their native tongue, a language that sounded to Caden like wind through crystal chimes, beautiful but with sharp edges. I am not your enemy, Lyra said, switching to Universal so Caden could understand. Vorlag has betrayed us all. He sacrificed our warriors for his ambition. Traitor, hissed one of the guardians, a taller figure whose armor bore more elaborate markings. You were judged and found wanting. Where is the Cathar? Who has interfered with justice? Lyra fought like a woman possessed, defending the weakened Caden. She moved with a grace and fury he had never seen, her blade an extension of her body. She was a storm, the embodiment of war, dancing between her opponents, her movements too fast for the human eye to follow. Suddenly, Caden felt a sharp, burning sensation in his left shoulder, different from the constant agony of the Cathar. A moment later, he saw movement out of the corner of his eye. A guardian had separated from the group, circling around to flank him, weapon raised. Before the guardian could strike, Lyra was there, as if she had sensed the danger to Caden. She intercepted the blow meant for him, but the maneuver left her open to attack from behind. Lyra, behind you! Caden shouted, the warning torn from his throat by instinct. She spun, barely avoiding a lethal strike, but one of the guardians broke through and wounded Caden in the leg with a glancing blow. Caden's cry of pain mingled with Lyra's, who felt a phantom blow to her own leg, a connection neither of them had anticipated. That split-second hesitation cost her dearly. A guardian struck her with the hilt of his sword, and she was thrown against the canyon wall, unconscious. Blood the color of midnight trickled from a cut on her temple. The guardians advanced on Caden, their weapons raised. The leader reached out, fingers extended toward the pulsing wound on Caden's chest, where the Cathar had made its home. The sentence must be fulfilled, the guardian intoned. The balance must be restored. Caden, operating on pure instinct and adrenaline, did the only thing he could think of. He rolled, grabbing a handful of the luminescent moss that grew in patches along the canyon floor, and threw it into the guardian's face. The moss released a cloud of spores that clung to the warrior's mask, temporarily blinding him. In the confusion, Caden managed to drag himself and the unconscious Lyra deeper into the canyon, into a labyrinth of narrow passages barely wide enough for them to squeeze through. His medical training helped him find the path of least resistance, using the natural contours of the rock to put as much distance as possible between them and their pursuers. When he reached the dead end, he realized he had only one option. Concentrating on the Cathar in his chest, he deliberately pressed against the wound, intensifying the pain. The agony nearly made him black out, but he held on, feeling the energy signature of the symbiote flare like a beacon. As he'd hoped, the guardian sensed it and moved in his direction, but away from where he'd hidden Lyra. Using himself as bait, he led them into a narrow passage where the canyon walls were unstable. One carefully placed shot from his sidearm caused a cascade of rocks to separate him from his pursuers. It wouldn't hold them for long, but it bought him precious time to return to Lyra. When Lyra awoke, Caden was leaning over her, dressing her head wound. His face was pale from blood loss, but his eyes burned with determination. I distracted them, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Lured them into a narrow passage and caused a rock slide. We have a few hours at most. She looked at him, at his caring hands and understood that their connection had become something more than just a transferred curse. She saw in his eyes not pity but respect, and he in hers saw not shame, but an injustice that had to be fought. "You risk your life," she said, touching the bandage he had applied with gentle fingers. "Again." "Old habits," he replied with a weak smile. "Besides, we have a date with a certain general, don't we?" She shook her head in disbelief. "You humans, I have never understood your capacity to joke in the face of death." "It's not joking," he said, his expression turning serious. "It's choosing to live fully until the end comes. Speaking of which," he grimaced as the cathar sent a fresh wave of pain through him. "Tell me more about this Vorlag. I want to know exactly who we're going after." As Lyra spoke of her former rival and his betrayal, Caden found himself studying her face, the subtle shifts in her expressions, the way her amber eyes darkened when she mentioned the warriors who had died because of Vorlag's ambition. Despite their differences, pain was a universal language they both understood all too well. They found Vorlag's trail through a stroke of luck. A patrol of his personal guard passed near their hiding place, their conversations carrying on the still desert air. They spoke of the general's movements, of his new fortress established in an ancient volcanic crater to the north. "He's using the geothermal energy to power his forces," Lyra translated for Caden. "The crater is a natural fortress with only one entry point, heavily guarded. Infiltrating it seemed impossible, but Caden, despite his fading strength, did not give up. Studying the data on the symbiont he had requested from Lyra and analyzing his own sensations, he made a discovery. "The cathar doesn't just feed on pain," he said as they hid, observing the fortress from a ridge overlooking the crater. Smoke rose from the center, where the active vents of the volcano provided power for Vorlag's operation. "It feeds on the life force released through pain. It can be deceived or overloaded." The plan was insane, almost suicidal, but it was their only chance. They waited until the darkest part of the night, when two of the moons had set and only the pale blue one remained, casting just enough light to see by. Using Lyra's knowledge of guard rotations and Caden's unexpected talent for creating distractions, they infiltrated the fortress. Caden had repurposed parts of his medical equipment into crude explosives. The resulting chaos allowed them to slip past the outer defenses. But as they penetrated deeper into the fortress, the cathar seemed to grow more agitated, as if it sensed the proximity of its original target. The pain became almost unbearable, forcing Caden to his knees more than once. Each time Lyra would help him up, her face a mask of determination tinged with guilt. "Time is running out," she whispered as she studied the rapid deterioration of his condition. The veins around his wound had turned black, spreading like a spiderweb across his chest. His skin had taken on a grayish pallor, and his breathing was becoming increasingly labored. "The cathar is consuming you faster than I expected." But there was something else happening, something unexpected. As they moved through the labyrinthine corridors of the fortress, Caden began to feel a strange pull, a directional tug from the cathar. The symbiont was reacting to Lyra's presence, seeking its original, ideal host. "I can feel you," he whispered, as they pressed against a wall to avoid a patrol. "The cathar, it's like a compass pointing to you." A particularly intense wave of pain struck him then, driving him to his knees. The world blurred around him, and suddenly he wasn't seeing the fortress anymore. He was standing in a vast chamber with crystalline walls, facing a semicircle of stern-faced warriors in ceremonial armor. Among them, prominently placed in the center, was Vorlag. Younger, his expression grave rather than cruel. "Commander Lyra," Vorlag's voice echoed in this vision, "you disobeyed a direct order. The settlement was to be sacrificed for the greater good." "They were innocents," Caden heard Lyra's voice respond, though it seemed to come from his own throat. "There is no honor in such a victory." The vision shifted, and he saw Vorlag's face close to his, to Lyra's, speaking in a hushed, urgent tone. "You were my finest student. Don't make me do this." Then darkness and pain, and the sensation of the cathar entering flesh for the first time. Caden gasped as the vision faded, finding himself back in the fortress corridor, with Lyra gripping his shoulders, her face inches from his, eyes wide with concern. "You saw it," she whispered, not a question, but a realization. "My sentencing." He nodded, still reeling from the vivid memory. "The cathar, it's mixing our memories somehow." Her expression was unreadable. Then you understand now what forelag was to me, what I lost. In that moment, another wave of pain washed over Lyra, echoing Caden's agony. But this time, she too experienced a flash of memory, not her own, but his. She saw a medical academy, felt the weight of the oath being taken, experienced the crushing guilt as Rico's life slipped away, despite Caden's desperate efforts to save him. Your friend, she said softly. You couldn't save him. Caden's eyes widened. You saw Rico? The connection works both ways, she said. The Cathar is binding us deeper than I thought possible. When they became separated in the confusion of a security breach, this connection proved invaluable. Caden navigated the unfamiliar corridors by following the pull of the symbiont, finding his way to Lyra despite the fortress's confusing layout. Similarly, Lyra discovered she could sense when Caden was in immediate danger. During a close encounter with a guard, she felt a sudden, sharp pain in her arm, a phantom warning that Caden was about to be attacked from behind. Her shouted warning saved his life, the guard's blade missing his vital organs by centimeters. We're connected, she said later, as they bound his wound. The Cathar has bound us in ways I never understood when I carried it. Then let's use it, Caden replied, his voice steady despite the pain. Together. The final confrontation with Vorlag took place in the very heart of the geothermal station, among hissing pipes and clouds of steam. The general was not what Caden had expected. He was smaller than Lyra, his blue skin a shade paler, almost lavender, but his presence was commanding, his amber eyes cold and calculating. Lyra, he said, his voice surprisingly gentle, you should have stayed dead. It would have been kinder. Kindness was never your strength, Vorlag, she replied, her blade held at the ready. Neither was honesty. Tell him how you sacrificed our warriors for your ambition. Vorlag's laugh was like shattered glass. And who will believe you? A condemned traitor and a human infected with your sentence. He drew his own weapon, a sword that hummed with energy. I have risen to the high command. I am untouchable. His gaze shifted to Caden, assessing the human with cold calculation. Your new pet is dying, Lyra. The Cathar was never meant for human physiology. You can feel it, can't you? The accelerated degradation? He moved closer, circling them like a predator. I taught you better than to form attachments. They are weaknesses to be exploited. You taught me many things, Lyra responded, her stance mirroring his, the student unconsciously adopting the posture of her master. Some worth keeping, others worth fighting against. Still the idealist, Vorlag sneered, still believing compassion has a place in warfare. This is why I had to remove you. Our people cannot afford your sentimentality. He moved with the same fluid grace as Lyra, but there was a different quality to it, calculation rather than passion. Each of his strikes was a familiar pattern to Lyra, forms she had practiced thousands of times under his tutelage. Now those same lessons were being used against her. Remember the sixth form, Lyra? He taunted as their blades locked. Balance before victory. Sacrifice the limb to preserve the core. I remember everything, she replied, countering with a move he had taught her decades ago, including what you conveniently forgot. Honor before expediency. He easily overpowered the weakened Caden, casting him aside like a broken doll. Caden slammed into a bank of equipment, the impact sending fresh waves of agony through his body as the Cathar fed greedily on his pain. Have you come to die, traitor? Vorlag sneered, advancing on Lyra, who stood her ground, though Caden could see the fear in her eyes. Not fear for herself, he realized, but for him. Caden struggled to rise, but his strength was nearly gone. The Cathar had consumed too much of his life force. His vision began to blur, darkness creeping in at the edges. He knew he had minutes, perhaps seconds, before his body gave out completely. Lyra glanced at Caden, who lay on the floor, nearly unconscious. Her amber eyes reflected the flames from the geothermal vents, turning them to molten gold. In that glance, he saw her decision form, and through their deepening connection, he felt her resolve crystallize. No, she said, her voice steady and clear. I've come to take back what's mine. With an inhuman scream, filled with 3 years of agony, Lyra launched herself at Caden. Not at Vorlag, but at Caden. Vorlag, caught off guard by this unexpected move, hesitated. That hesitation cost him the advantage. Lyra reached Caden and with movements too swift to follow, ripped the spear from Caden's chest. The spear, not a physical object, but the manifestation of the Cathar, the symbiotic sentence that had appeared when they needed a weapon. Lyra reached Caden, and with movements too swift to follow, ripped the spear from Caden's chest. The spear, not a physical object, but the manifestation of the Cathar, the symbiotic sentence that had appeared when they needed a weapon. For a moment, he felt an immense relief. The pain was gone. His strength returned, flooding back like a tide. A profound lightness overtook him, the absence of agony so complete, so perfect that he nearly wept with the sheer joy of it. He could breathe without feeling like his chest was being torn apart. He could move without stars exploding behind his eyes. He was free. He had endured the unendurable, and now it was over. He could walk away, leave this alien world behind, find a way back to his own people. This wasn't his fight, wasn't his war. He had paid more than enough for his impulsive act of mercy, and Lyra collapsed to her knees, her body shaking from the returned pain. The wound on her chest opened once more, pulsing with darkness. Her face contorted in the familiar agony he had carried for weeks, but magnified. The Cathar had grown stronger, hungrier during its time with Caden. "Run!" she screamed through gritted teeth, her eyes finding his. "You're free!" "Go!" Her body convulsed as the symbiont reclaimed its territory, tearing into her with renewed ferocity. Freed from the curse, Caden became who he was before, an elite soldier. His medical training had taught him not just how to heal, but where the body was most vulnerable. He moved with a speed and precision that Vorlog couldn't react to. The fight was short and brutal. Caden was victorious. The traitorous general lay at his feet, unconscious but alive. But Caden wasn't looking at him. He was looking at Lyra. She was dying. The symbiont, having returned to her ravaged body, was killing her. It had grown too strong, too hungry during its time away. He rushed to her, lifting her into his arms. Her skin was growing cold, the vibrant blue fading to a dull gray. The wound on her chest pulsed with malevolent energy, expanding with each heartbeat. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't know it would be like this." "Hush," he said, brushing a strand of metallic hair from her face. He looked at the Cathar spear, manifested once more on the floor beside them, then at her. He glanced down at his own unmarked chest, feeling the blessed absence of pain. The freedom he had almost forgotten was possible. He reached out, touching the smooth, unbroken skin where his wound had been, savoring the sensation. He looked at his hands, a medic's hands, hands that had failed to save Rico, hands that had saved Lyra once, only to condemn her again. His oath was to save lives, and he couldn't save her without sharing her fate. "A medic's oath isn't just to heal wounds," he said softly. "It's to share the burden of pain. I can't take all of yours, Lyra, but I swear by everything I am, you won't carry it alone anymore." But he didn't take all of it. He picked up the spear, and before anyone could stop him, plunged it into his own thigh. The pain was familiar now, almost welcome, an old enemy returning. But it was different this time. He controlled it, directed it, became its master rather than its victim. The wound on Lyra's chest didn't disappear, but it shrank by half, ceasing to be mortal. The pulsing darkness faded to a dull throb, and at the same instant, an identical, smaller wound appeared on Caden's thigh. The pain returned, but it was different now, bearable, shared. They looked at each other, both wounded, both in pain, but for the first time, truly free. In her eyes, he saw not gratitude. That would have been too simple, too human a response, but understanding, recognition, a promise. "You could have let me die," she said, her voice stronger now. "That was never an option," he replied. They bound Vorlag with his own restraints, and Lyra recorded his confession, extracted through means Caden chose not to witness. The evidence would be enough to clear her name, though whether her people would accept it remained to be seen. They left Viridia on Vorlag's captured ship, a sleek vessel that responded to Lyra's touch with almost sentient eagerness. The revelation of Vorlag's treason caused an upheaval among her people. But Lyra was still considered an exile, and Caden a stranger, an anomaly. The universe was vast, and they were now unbound by planet or allegiance. They became wanderers. Their path led to the stars, the future uncertain, but they had a ship, they had justice, and they had each other. One night, in the silence of space, with distant stars painting patterns across the viewport, he tended to the wound on her chest, and she tended to the one on his thigh. Their wounds, one pain, shared between two. Caden applied a salve of his own making, a blend of human medicine and the strange herbs Lyra had taught him to recognize. His fingers moved with practiced precision around the edges of her wound, which pulsed more softly now that the burden was divided. "It hurts," he said, without complaint, merely stating a fact as she mirrored his movements, treating his thigh with the same mixture. "I know," she replied, and there was no bitterness in her voice, only acceptance, and perhaps something more. The soft blue light from a nearby nebula bathed the small cabin in an ethereal glow. Their shadows merged on the wall behind them, two silhouettes becoming one. He looked at her, this alien warrior who had become his companion, his patient, his... what? There wasn't a word for what they had become to each other. Something beyond friendship, beyond debt, beyond even the bond of shared suffering. "But it's easier than carrying your pain alone," he said finally. Lyra smiled, for the first time, truly. And in the light of distant stars, he realized that this shared pain was not a curse, but the strongest bond in the universe. She set aside the medical supplies and reached out. Their hands met between them, blue fingers intertwining with human ones, a bridge between worlds built on understanding no one else could comprehend. They sat in silence, each feeling the other's pain, both the physical torment of the cathar and the deeper wounds of their souls. This was not an ending. The pain would continue. The symbiont would hunger. But they would face it together, keepers of each other's suffering, guardians of each other's strength. It was their beginning,